Residents 2020 video presentation. I'm Catherine Malfa, the chair of the Summer Residents Advisory Committee. This would have been our 74th annual Summer Residents Town Meeting, but in light of the pandemic, we were unable to hold an in-person meeting and instead are presenting this Summer Resident 2020 video presentation. As you know, our committee is comprised solely of non-voters and is an official committee of the town of Chatham. Our mission is to identify and study issues and make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. Our committee this year is a group of 13 appointed by the Board of Selectmen as follows. Joel Rotner served as vice chair this year. Joel is from West Hartford, Connecticut. Tina Mead served as our secretary. Tina is from Washington, D.C. John O'Toole served as the committee's treasurer. John is from Westwood, Massachusetts. Roger Donald is from Naples, Florida. Rob Creswick is from Paoli, Pennsylvania. Joe McDonald is from Palm City, Florida. George Myers from Venice, Florida. Jamie Meehan from Parkland, Florida. Phil Richardson from Tyburn, California. Colette Trailer from Miami, Florida. Mike Waters from New York City. And I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. Our committee begins its season with a May meeting to discuss the annual town warrant and continues with weekly meetings on Friday mornings. This year, in light of the pandemic, we met once in June and continued with our regular Friday meetings beginning on July 10th. We identified and studied a number of issues, including attainable housing, the process used to prioritize town capital budgets, and issues relating to resident and non-resident property taxes. This summer, we had several town representatives join us at our Friday virtual meetings, including Shireen Davis, the chair of the Board of Selectmen, Jill Goldsmith, the town manager, Alex Halela, finance director, Stephen Daniel, chair of the finance committee, Tom Temple, director of DPW, Katie Donovan, director of community development, and Dr. Duncanson, director of natural resources. We thank each of these town representatives who have provided us with their time and knowledge during this exceptionally difficult time. We understand that each town employee is providing above and beyond service during this pandemic, and we appreciate the time afforded to our committee. For this taped 2020 video presentation, we would like to welcome and introduce the following speakers. The chair of the Board of Selectmen, Shireen Davis, our town manager, Jill Goldsmith, and our finance director, Alex Halela, will begin our program and speak about the state of Chatham and the impact of COVID-19. Jamie Meehan and John O'Toole of our committee will then present the Chatham Scorecard. Jamie and John will be followed by Phil Richardson of our committee, who will give an update on the committee's work on attainable housing. We will then hear from two additional town representatives. Ted Kean, the director of natural resources, will join us to discuss coastal resilience and dredging, and Dr. Robert Duncanson will speak on health and Chatham's response to COVID-19. Please enjoy the program. The program will also be available via the town's website in the online demand archives for your viewing at your convenience. And now let me introduce our first speaker, Shireen Davis, the chair of the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you to Channel 18 for putting this meeting together for us, and to the Summer Residents Advisory Committee for hosting this virtual annual Summertown meeting. And also for inviting me to speak as chair of the Board of Selectmen and your Selectmen liaison. We are presently in a time of unusual circumstances in Chatham, and we can look at 2019 and 2020 through the lens of a pre-COVID Chatham, a COVID era Chatham, and with hope very soon a post-COVID Chatham, which our Governor Baker calls will be our new normal. 2019 and 2020 will go down in the history books like all communities in our country including your hometowns, as communities facing balance between fiscal responsibility, community safety, and economic stability. In my annual report to the citizens and taxpayers for 2020, I wrote that the year was a year to create innovative policy and build community value. The Opeb trustees, which I serve as chair, recommended a more aggressive plan to be funded at our annual town meeting. We adjusted that recommendation in light of the pandemic. We supported a level service, essentially level funded 2020 budget. And at our annual town meeting, deferred capital projects like the COA and several articles while deferring many to a town meeting in the future. Monomoy federal boundary dispute continues, and we strive to work on that issue in the administrative, legislative, and legal angles. We continue to review the recommendations from the 365 Task Force, which was spearheaded by Selectman Kokolas and myself, the Economic Development Committee's review, and the Finance Committee's working group on affordable and attainable housing. We rewrote and approved a revised housing production trust plan. And now we are working along with our fellow housing trustees on creating an aggressive policy and action plan for affordable and town attainable housing in the future. Our town manager has sent out a request for proposal for land for affordable and attainable housing as we speak. We changed the name and charge for the Affordable Housing Committee to address town's ongoing housing needs. It is now called the Community Housing Partnership Committee. Seasonal voluntary water restrictions are in place again this year, and I encourage all of you to review them on our town's website and adjust your water consumption, if necessary, accordingly. The board, as water sewer commissioners, adopted a new water consumption rate recommended by the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee. We continue sewer easements on private road, and we issued orders of taking on Battlefield Road, Cedar Street, Champlain, Port Fortune Lane, Sears Road, Stage Harbor Road, and Stage Neck to continue the town's wastewater infrastructure project. We renewed our intermunicipal agreement with Orleans to regulate access to town North Beach, and we increased our Chatham shares of receipts from the permit fee. Our beach continues to be monitored by town staff, and we manage the lease turns and piping plovers. Attention to issues of coastal resiliency have been addressed with long-term planning, and we have dredged twice Stage Harbor entrance channel, once with a private contractor, and then recently with the Army Corps of Engineers Currituck. U.S. Coast Guard station designation and downsize is a serious ongoing concern for us in light of several dangerous cuts through our outlying barrier beaches. One of the things we were able to achieve was to keep an aid to navigation off Chatham in place. Even though we have downsized Coast Guard Station Chatham, our very talented, capable Chatham Fire Department, Harbor Master Department, and our police department has been very instrumental in some recent rescues on the Outer Beach and Chatham Cut. We're going to take up our mooring regulation for rewrite in a time to be determined, but they are not forgotten and they are on our minds. The Fish Pier Observation Deck and Stage Harbor Dock are completed, and we are cautiously proceeding with 90 Bridge Street Capital Waterfront project. And that includes our shellfish upweller site plan, which the Board of Selectmen set as a priority for that site. There's an ongoing monitoring of the West Chatham roadway project. We appointed designees to address requests for upgrade of the roadway plan. And we also continue to work with the West Chatham business sector to address their ongoing construction concerns and the financial impact that may be occurring. At the revised town meeting in June, we considered a possible design improvement of the town transfer station with emphasis on OSHA safety standards and voted funding necessary for that construction. We adopted a municipal solid waste contract extension, but unfortunately we had to increase our sticker fees because of increase in tipping and recycling. We continue to work to be a green community, and we do have green community designation projects in place and have adopted an energy reduction plan and fuel efficiency vehicle policy. We continue to monitor the airport master plan update. We were met with a lot of concern by local residents as that plan went in process, and we encouraged that committee to create a working subgroup to advise them. We held 3 town meetings this year, 2 special town meetings, one to accept a contingent offer of a property on 1610 Main Street for a siting of the COA. One petitioner special town meeting for a feasibility study for an alternate site at the Monomoy Regional School District property on Kroll Road. We also held a revised, downsized COVID-19 safe style meeting outside at Veterans Field to approve and pass the town, schools, and water budgets. Many articles, including the COA and several CPA-funded projects and petition articles, again, have been deferred to a future meeting. A post-annual town meeting election ballot question passed, which was to fund the revised transfer station construction plan to satisfy the OSHA regulations requirements. There were 2 uncontested races, one for my position on the board and one for Housing Authority. And then there was a contested race for 2 seats on the Monomoy Regional School District Committee, which the incumbents won their seats. The onset of COVID-19 pandemic shifted the collective consciousness of our town and townspeople in March. Chatham declared a state of emergency and the governor's COVID-19 mandates and recommendations were implemented. We did shelter in place, like many of the communities in the state. Communications for us during this time was key to the process of balancing safety and the economic vitality of our community. Both the town manager and I have issued reverse 911 update calls to the community, and there's been an establishment of an emergency operations center that has safety, health, and community sector town departments who work together and have weekly updated meetings. Community public Zoom forum it happened, I think, back in the early part of the COVID. I can't remember the date right now, but it was attended by several hundred people and viewed on YouTube by over 1,000. And it helped us to address the issues of residents, taxpayers, and businesses, and what they're going to be dealing, or what they were dealing with, and what they're going to be dealing with in the future. It helps to have a voice in something so incredibly impacting. So we continue to provide updates, information through our town website and community outreach. It's really important for our town to continue communications. Through my recommendation and conversation with the town manager, the Board of Selectmen, feeling the immediate need to address the economic impact of COVID-19 on our townspeople, put together a small task force that was made up of Selectman Dykens, the town manager Goldsmith, and Finance Committee Chair Daniel and myself to assess and to make recommendations on program and policy. Out of it came the establishment of the Chatham Corona Impact Fund, which at this time has helped many Chatham residents and will most likely do so throughout the year. I'd like to thank the individuals, including some of you who have donated to that fund. I've been asked as a selectman member of the Cape and Islands Select Men's and Councilors Association to serve on the Cape Cod Reopening Task Force Senator Sear has had organized. And some of the outcomes and goals that we've been working on through the last few months is to fast track assisting businesses and providing the tools and the guidance, best practices and expertise to assist those businesses in what they need or will be needed to require to reopen. Secondly, was to assist the Cape and Islands towns, providing us, the elected officials, and local decision makers with resources and support to create some level of uniformity and strengthen policy decisions. Third track is creating a universal message, trying to, as best we can, to promote a consistent Cape. The group meets weekly and weighs in with the Governor's Advisory Committee. Right now, we're in full summer mode in Chatham, and we, like many communities, are doing our best to address the public safety issue around COVID-19. Chatham has a mandatory mask order downtown at the downtown at the Fish Pier and the Lighthouse Overlook. We have implemented restrictions on parking at town beaches and worked with our businesses and nonprofits to educate and support them. We want to remind people that no matter your age or where you're from or who you are gathering with, even if it's close family and friends, you are at risk and should take those proper precautions. The town manager and I have attended meetings with other town managers and town board chairs to share information and get updates about what each town is doing to address issues of managing towns during the pandemic. We're called the Elbow Up Committee because it is the committee is made up of our towns of Brewster, Chatham, Orleans, Eastham, Wellfleet, Truro, and Provincetown. We share different initiatives, and we steal each other's ideas and programs just to all work together to really keep the line of communications open for the Cape. The group has decided to work on what next steps we're going to need for our communities, what we will be faced with from a town budget perspective, and what community services do we need to shift. In light of COVID, which in the near future, I don't think we feel is going away as quickly as we had hoped, we're doing our best to balance safety and support the communities to rebuild. Our board will be working with the town manager to prioritize policy programs, capital projects, and service in light of economic uncertainties, and in light of the fact that we may be faced with low and decreased state and local revenues. We will have to decide whether the town has the flavor for capital projects and what are those priorities to serve the community. I enjoy working with my fellow Board of Selectmen members who are dedicated, talented individuals. I was elected in an uncontested race in June, and in our reorganization was voted again chair. Selectman Kokolas is vice chair, and Selectman Metters serves as clerk. Rounding out our board is Selectman Dykins and DeCastro. We each serve as liaisons to 7 to 9 committees and work on a variety of various subcommittees and task force. We're the appointing authority for those boards and appreciate the work that our town volunteers do, including your time and input. We take your work for the public very serious. None of what we could do could be achieved without our town manager, Jill Goldsmith, and executive secretary, Shauna Neely, and our dedicated department heads and talented staff. In closing, the Board of Selectmen continues its fiscal oversight and policy direction in support of our established goals, and along with the town manager, provide executive leadership for the town of Chatham. Together, we pursue collaborative process, ethical and professional procedures to ensure that town resources are dedicated to providing the best services possible to protect public safety, public assets, and a special quality of life we know in Chatham. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak. In closing, thank you for your dedication, and please stay safe and well.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. I'm Jill Goldsmith, your town manager, and with me is Alex Halila, our finance director, and we're going to do a State of the Town presentation for August 11, 2020. So let's go. 2020 State of the Town has to reflect on extraordinary circumstances. And this is a picture of our annual town meeting on June 22nd, 2020, outdoors at Veterans Field. Cue the fog. It was a perfect Cape Cod Chatham day. 2020 State of the Town certainly started our fiscal year with an extraordinary circumstance, and that was a tornado on July 23rd, 2019. Extraordinary response by town staff in cooperation with the many residents who were in town that day. We ended up seeking $400,000 in state reimbursement for costs associated with that event. From there, we tried to get back to normal and worked on our budget strategy and our budget summit on October 28th, 2019, where we talked priorities with the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, as well as the Monomoy Regional School District. From there, we did as we usually do. We prepare our fiscal year 2021 budget on January 13th, 2020. Alex Halila and I made the presentation. And at that time, we were looking at a growth budget, expanding some staffing as it relates to town priorities. We worked through some of the budget and also had recommendations, favorable recommendations by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. And then we were hit with the COVID pandemic. We declared a state of emergency on March 13th, 2020, that allowed us to fine tune some of the things that we thought we would be able to do for our May annual town meeting. But shortly we knew that we had to go into core essential services and everything changed. But but it doesn't mean we weren't prepared for it. So we then went into our COVID financial planning. Alex Halelo will talk more about that. Made our pivot on May 7th and had a substantially reduced capital and operating budget. And through all of this, we knew we needed to get our S&P bond rating affirmed as we were going through a borrowing authorization for previously approved waterfront infrastructure projects. And very happy that we had it affirmed with a strong outlook. Alex will talk more about that. And then the picture that you saw at the beginning of this presentation, we held our annual town meeting on June 22nd, outdoors, 6 p.m. on a Monday evening, and our quorum was 100 voters, and we had more than 200 people there. So quite an extraordinary year, starting off our fiscal year in July and ending it in June. When we had our COVID state of emergency declared, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health were very careful not to make decisions without having community input. And so the Board of Selectmen hosted a COVID community forum on May 11th, 2020, as you see in the slide here. And it was our first time on a Zoom platform, and it was an open platform. With that, we had more than 400 people participating, with more than 600 people contacting us in some way, either by phone, by email, all giving us answers to the 5 questions that we were asked. So this is how the forum started, as we awaited word from the governor at that time on what the stay-at-home advisory would mean to the town, and then what it looked like for our town events moving forward with our important summer season and even beyond. And we're still under our COVID state of emergency, and we're still continuing to pivot and to review our fiscal services that are being offered and considered, as well as our town services that are being offered. Next slide. So if you caught it live on Channel 18, this is what you would have seen sometime during the community forum. And again, it was very informative. We had a facilitator help us. Our longtime resident, Brad Schiff, was a great facilitator, and we heard a lot, and we heard from many summer residents, non-residents, visitors. Everybody shared one thing in common: their love for Chatham. One of the questions focused primarily on businesses and nonprofits, how to operate effectively in safety, and we received a lot of public comment on this. The other questions related to how do we handle large public gatherings, how do we establish a consistent set of town-wide guidelines for safety, how do we ensure there's a clear understanding and enforcement of the established guidelines, and what else do we need to consider? And again, this was on May 11th, 2020. From there, we needed to stay engaged with our businesses as well as our town employees on how we can work to maintain our local economy, which is also an important component to our fiscal plan. And so on May 27th, and it seems so long ago, 2020, the Chamber of Commerce in association with the Merchants Association had come to the Board of Selectmen to talk about Main Street, downtown Main Street, how they're going to promote better social distancing as well as vehicle and pedestrian traffic flows. And the concerns that were raised were then I convened a working group of town staff where we discussed the safety issues about their proposal. And then we had come back to the Board of Selectmen, who then asked me to institute and create a working group, which would include town staff, including a planning board member, a person from the Historic Business Committee, as well as a neighborhood representative, in addition to the Chamber and Merchants Association, 19 members. And we held our meetings through Microsoft Teams, which is what we're using here as our platform. And the group did a site walk so that they could see where they needed some traffic safety improvements, as well as some areas where there was some clogging with pedestrian congregation. From there, as a first step, they repurposed some of the 133 parallel parking spaces on Main Street downtown, and they reserved 14 spaces at that time for curbside pickup. And that means they eliminated 4 spaces around the areas where pedestrians are known to congregate. We made the recommendation and proposal to the Board of Selectmen on June 16, 2020, and this working group continues to meet weekly. In fact, we just did a presentation and a recommendation to reduce some of the parking spaces that were seen, as you can see here in the yellow hash marks, return them back to regular parking. So this is the front of the Squire, and it's posted for no standing, which means 10 minutes for curbside pickup. And wherever you see these yellow hashed out areas, that is 10 minutes only. Then, of course, we needed to figure out how to hold outdoor dining, which is a temporary approval. It's not in our zoning bylaws or in any of our other general bylaws. And so the working group had also made recommendations to the board about how to do this. And our internal working group of staff also worked through applications that also include approval by the Alcohol Beverages Control Commission. And those were presented to the Board of Selectmen to help get businesses open, restaurants in particular, ASAP for outdoor dining. And here's a early picture of the Squire. I think it was in the first week where we noted its temporary rear parking lot use. And most of these temporary measures are in place during the COVID state of emergency or December 31st, 2020 per governor's order. And that will be reviewed likely months before, hopefully soon, both of those orders expire. The Board of Selectmen and the Board of Health continued their collaboration for these important decisions, and a mask face coverings order was issued by the Board of Health on May 21st, 2020. So the Board of Health, they had their mandatory mask order originally from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the downtown area. That just recently was changed from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. as you can see on the slide. And then the high traffic visitor area destinations such as the Fish Pier, Lighthouse Overlook, and the transfer station required masks from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and that is 7 days a week. The Board of Health also voted fines. We're hoping to not go directly to fines, and our police officers have extra masks to give out, and they also have a very nice educational flyer. Again, education is important for us. And at the bottom of the slide is a note from one of the visitors who also shares our love for Chatham, noting that they appreciated the mask order. During this COVID emergency, we were able to enhance our communications and our communication platform. So this is something that I have put out, weekly community updates, and they've been out since early March, as soon as the COVID state of emergency was declared. This is one of the first ones that I had produced, and they're all uploaded on the town's website, and we are distributing them as much as possible, but they're not in hard copies. So at this time, it's only online. And every week I try to share what votes the Board of Selectmen have taken. A lot of work has been done on the COVID state of emergency guidelines, but also there's still regular business that has to be conducted by the town. And so this, we thought, was a really good way to keep people informed right after the selectmen's meetings. And then last but not least, back in March 23rd, the Board of Selectmen at a meeting had discussed that there needs to be some way to help our residents. And we partnered with the FinCom chairman and members of a nonprofit group, and they then established the Chatham Helping Chatham Fund, and it's the CCIF Chatham Coronavirus Impact Fund. And it's really been a remarkable effort. So it's raised more than, it says 480,000. I think it's increased since just a few weeks ago when I made this presentation. But they had at that time 98 applications that were approved and 92,000 in direct bill relief. That means that they paid off or paid the monthly payment for rent or utilities. And then they're also contributing $10,000 a month for the regional school district's food program and pantry for the students. So now I'm going to turn this over to our finance director, Alex Halila, for our coronavirus financial plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. As Jill has just mentioned, the coronavirus financial plan was something that we came up with in response to the pandemic, and we had to react rather quickly during the months of March, April, and May to reduce the budget and to look forward not only for FY 2020, which was the current fiscal year at that time, but to FY 2021, which we were planning the budget, as well as looking forward to FY 2022 and even beyond that. So as you can see on this slide, what we do know is that our financial world is uncertain. We're planning for a possible 6 to 18-month recession, unlike any other, as we don't know what impact coronavirus will have on our local economy. And as Jill illustrated, communication with the community and the governing body is the key to finding solutions. And I think that the town manager and the Board of Selectmen have done a great job doing that, as Jill noted in the earlier slides. But looking at the local economy and our local estimated receipts, when we first planned the FY 2021 budget in January 2020, we'd estimated our local receipts to come in at about 85% of our prior year actuals, so just over $7 million. We were looking at raising tax revenue of about almost $38 million, which is about 73% contribution to our receipts, and using available funds of $5.5 million, or about 10%. Moving through and redoing the budget numerous times, cutting where we had to, and reducing those budgets, and especially local estimated receipts, not knowing what was going to happen with our tourism economy for the hotel motel, as well as the meals tax and possibly the beach receipts. We reduced those down to about 57% of prior year actuals. So now local receipts are contributing about 9% to our FY 2021 receipts, so $4,772,000. Tax revenue is still at 73%, but it's now reduced to $36,881,000. And we've increased the use of available funds from that 10% to 12% of that piece of the pie, so about $5.8 million to fund the FY 2021 budgets. Not only, we didn't look just at reducing our receipts, we also looked at cutting our budgets. So the operating budget, when first presented, was $32.5 million. As was voted in June 2020, we reduced that by $706,109 to an operating budget approved at town meeting of $31,826,221. Our capital budget was also reduced, this by $606,000, just over $606,000, for a capital budget for FY 2021 of $2,324,145. And then we had other capital articles that originally presented were just over $2 million, which we almost cut in half. So we have other capital articles presented at $1,220,600. And those other capital articles are the Eldridge Public Library, dredging, the Child Care Voucher Program, as well as the other Post-Employment Benefits Trust Fund. Very important for us to conserve our available cash, as well as have a very conservative outlook for our local estimated receipts. So on this slide, I just want to point out the two highest receipts that we get are the meals tax and the hotel motel tax. And those are the ones that we really don't know what's going to happen for FY 2021, as restaurants were shut down for March, April, May, and half of June. And then hotel motels were also shut down, and we're not sure what is going to come in. Also, the meals tax, the local share was waived by the governor. So for the months of April, May, and June, we won't see those collections. So looking at what we did collect for FY 2020 for those final 3 months, which covered, actually, it didn't cover June, it covered March, April, and May, we received $450,046 in meals tax, which is about $23,000 less than we received for the same period in FY 2019. The hotel motel tax, we did see a big increase because we have the short-term rental tax, which again, the Department of Revenue has not broken out how much of that is of that $1.8 million is due to the short-term rentals versus the hotel rentals. But we continue to look at these local estimated receipts, and we'll know more in September when we receive the first quarter for FY 2021. So as we looked at the operating budget and the capital budgets, we looked at what was considered priority funding. So the review of the budget items for FY 2021 was in context of providing relief to all taxpayers through reserving of free cash and reducing the amount raised through the tax levy. We looked at what was considered to be core critical services reduced from level services, as Jill had discussed earlier in the presentation. Some of the core critical services over which we have little or no control are some of those contract services for example, from Weston and Sampson, our utilities, our debt service for previously approved debt, as well as some of our assessments from our retirement assessment and the health insurance assessments. So the operating budget alone shows a 2.85% increase over FY 2020. And again, this was in response to the uncertainty due to COVID-19 that we wanted to provide relief and preserve our reserves. The all-important slide, the FY 2021 estimated tax rate. At this time, we're looking at an estimated tax rate of $4.98 per thousand. Again, this is only estimated until it is approved by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. And here you can see some of the reasons for the increase. So while the operating budget represents a 3-cent increase to the tax rate, school assessments, as they're presented right now, are a 1-cent decrease. The reduction in the other articles, reliance on the tax levy, results in a 16-cent savings. But the decrease in our local estimated receipts added back 30 cents, again, being very conservative with our local estimated receipts, not knowing where it's going to come in. So this is all dependent upon our value, the total value of the town. If the value of the town goes up, obviously the tax rate will decrease. So again, estimated, and this is subject to change. Looking at our tax rate history over the years, back in FY 2014, the tax rate was $5.08 and fluctuates just around $5 ever since then. So we had a low of $4.82 this past year, again, because the values of the town did increase. So again, looking $4.98 moving forward. As the town manager mentioned, we did go out for a reaffirmation of our AAA bond rating in June of 2020, and we're both very pleased to report that our AAA with stable outlook was affirmed, and we also did get to borrow for the wastewater projects at 1.52% true interest costs. So the interest rates were very favorable at this time. So some of the things that Standard & Poor's had looked at were our budget and financial management policies, our reserves, the planning and forecast. This was something that they had looked at, especially in regards to COVID-19, the other post-employment benefits trust fund, and our funding strategy for that liability. So speaking of Opeb, again, our Opeb trust, and there are trustees. Our funding to date, we have a balance of just over $1.5 million as of June 30th. We've been funding it at $150,000 annually from our overlay surplus. This coming year, FY 2021, we expect to generate just over $500,000 from a 1.5% surcharge that you will see on your October 1st tax bill. And that is in place of the 3% surcharge that was for the land bank. So the 3% has been exchanged for a 1.5% surcharge. So basically saving the taxpayers about 50% on that surcharge. So we do pay as you go for a town share of health insurance premiums. That's in the operating budget. We pay 50% for retirees, and that's just over about $850,000. Strategy to address Opeb going forward. We have a $19 million liability. We'll have a new valuation as of June 30th, 2020, which usually we receive sometime in the middle of the budget planning process, usually in January of 2021 will come out the next one. The Opeb trustees have a more aggressive investment strategy to try and grow these funds. The funds are invested with Bartholomew and Company, who are our mutual investment advisors, and we do have those reports available on the town website. And the trustees are looking to fully fund the Opeb liability within 13 to 17 years, if not sooner. And our S&P bond rating, we wanted to highlight this as during COVID-19, we were very worried about how S&P would look at the reaction that Chatham has made to the COVID-19. So this slide, really quoting from them, says Chatham enters the national recession triggered by the outbreak of COVID-19 with strong reserves and liquidity and well-embedded financial management policies, particularly in the areas of budgeting and planning. While significant economic uncertainty remains, we understand management has taken measures to cushion the effects of potential revenue shortfalls. And these were the reasons why we did what we did, and we have our COVID budget as presented to town meeting. And now that's what I have right now, and I'll hand it back to Jill.
So this slide is usually our strategic planning and long-range planning slide to show what we're working on in the future, but I want to acknowledge items that are still in progress. And this takes the lead from the Board of Selectmen's goals and objectives that were heavily focused on community initiatives and social infrastructure. So as you see here, it's very important for the Board of Selectmen to continue their community assistance, and that was one of the reasons for initiating the discussions for the Chatham Coronavirus Impact Fund. But we're also looking at other ways to help the community. And at the June 22nd annual town meeting, we funded the child care voucher program enhanced from prior years at $75,000. We also funded items from the Community Preservation Act and committee recommended items for affordable housing and attainable housing and rental assistance. And then we're continuing to review our Chatham 365 task force recommendations that came in September of 2019. But I don't want to forget us looking forward and having planning meetings and discussions continuing for the COA facility project, our Kroll Road Route 28 intersection project, our waterfront infrastructure improvements. We just completed the Fish Pier observation deck as well as the trap dock, and continuing to look at the other projects that the board has listed as priorities funded through the waterfront bond article. And we also don't want to forget about our Monomoy Refuge Western Boundary legislation that was filed by Congressman Kean, HR 183, and continuing on that, also looking for an administrative solution. And then our transfer station project funding for phase 1 was awarded in June 2020 at the annual town meeting for a portion of the area for workplace safety and OSHA requirements, and we'll continue to review the entire project site for that moving forward. So continuing to look at capital improvements and capital planning, I'll turn this back over to Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Our CIP, or Capital Improvements Plan, we have a few years ago, we did the Community Compact Grant through the UMass Collins Center, where I identified all projects, regardless of their funding source. And we've updated that every year moving forward. So this includes projects that are funded by the Community Preservation Act, Chapter 90, borrowing, so debt service, water projects, although they're funded separately through the water revenues. They are identified as part of this approximately $65 million of capital investment plan. And again, everything from a small item to the Council on Aging, transfer station, etc. So the capital definition here is just anything that's $10,000 in cost and has a useful life of 5 years or greater. But then looking at the FY 2021 capital budget, we reduced the capital budget in response to COVID-19 so as to preserve our available funds. And then we'll look at programming those out, items that were deferred out later. So the FY 2021 capital budget, we used a rating criteria to prioritize our capital spending. Some of the specific categories, and again, this is through the Collins Center, was to preserve and enhance town assets, increase efficiency, be a good steward of public resources, the impact on the operating budget. Will it provide savings, or will it possibly, if it's something isn't funded, funded, will it have a negative impact on the operating budget? And then the community value, what we call the Chatham factor. And some of those are the key policy areas for the town of Chatham. So aesthetics, historic preservation, cultural and recreational opportunities, utilization, appropriate economic opportunities, youth and families, environmental sustainability, public health, and public safety. These are just some of the criteria. And again, not necessarily in that order. When we look at our capital, oftentimes we look at the debt service that we have and where we can fit items in that for which we have to borrow, not to negatively impact the taxpayers. So I think the Summer Residence Advisory Committee will also be talking about this, but here you can see where we have existing debt in the solid colors, and then our proposed and future debt in the as pattern areas here. So we have a proposed COA. It has not been approved yet, so it's subject to town meeting approval. We have a proposed transfer station, future items that have not been approved yet. The future transfer station has been approved. Those are the small ones that were just approved in June. Future waterfront, because that has been approved. This is where we program them in. But again, we need to look at where we program items in, not to negatively affect the taxpayer. And this is subject to change due to the timing of the borrowing, as well as what the interest rate will be. And if we're lucky enough, and what we do is we try to get grants instead of having to go out to borrow or spend cash that we have. So some of the grants that we've had due to COVID, we are eligible for the federal CARES grant. We have authorization up to $543,000. FEMA has declared a disaster in response to COVID-19. We're eligible for 75% reimbursement of costs. As the town manager mentioned, we received just about $400,000 in tornado response funds from the Commonwealth. The MassWorks dredging program, we received $350,000 for the maintenance dredging of Stage Harbor entrance channel. And then we have $100,000 carried over for the FY 2021-22 season for the Aunt Lydia's Cove project. And then moving on to our green community designation, I believe, Jill, you were going to speak to this.
Thank you, Alex. So in Alex's previous slides, it shows our commitment to climate change. And I thought it was important also to show our commitment to renewable energy and reducing our carbon footprint. So this slide notes a listing of our photovoltaic rooftop arrays that are listed by town building, as well as the power generation and the offset for the town's electrical demand. And then more recently is our commitment to our electric fleet. And right now we have 6 vehicles put into service since 2019. We have 2 Honda Clarities that are leased, being used by our community development and our town pool vehicles, as well as 3 Mitsubishi Outlanders that are used by Natural Resources, Police Department as our school resource officer's vehicle, as well as our water and sewer meter readers are using the Mitsubishi. And then we have 1 Nissan Leaf for inspectional services and inspections. And we received grants to lease the Nissan Leaf and had very low cost leases for the other 5 vehicles that were put into service. So as we head to the end of the presentation, I wanted to note that we are open 24/7, access via the town's website. And here are important links for information on this presentation, as well as the COVID-19 communications, governor's orders, everything you wanted to know about that. While town offices are not open to the public at this time, we're still available to answer phone calls, emails, faxes, snail mail with our drop-off boxes, and we're operating as close to usual as we have been in the past. And also visit the town's webpage for our annual reports and our selectmen and town manager goals. And for our last slide, I wanted to acknowledge the virtual retirement and changing of the guard for Fire Chief Pete Connick to Chief Dave D. Pasquale. Dave was our deputy chief and promoted to chief, and Justin Tavano, our fire lieutenant, was then promoted to deputy fire chief. So a very great day, exciting day, social distance and virtually. So I want to thank everybody for your attention to our presentation. And Alex?
Thank you.
And we are available anytime for any questions and appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill and Alex, for your presentation. I'm Jamie Meehan, a member of the SRAC committee. For the last 14 years, the committee has presented a Chatham Scorecard, our attempt to assess how well Chatham has been doing from a financial point of view compared with other Cape towns. The sources for our slides come from the town, Massachusetts Department of Revenue, and other sources. I'd like to thank my fellow committee member, John O'Toole, for helping me prepare for this presentation. This year, we will be updating the scorecard using a new base year of fiscal year 2016. Also, because of the unprecedented COVID-19 related economic turmoil, we have included fiscal year 2019 data on some slides for comparison purposes. On this slide, we're showing a summary of Chatham's financial performance. Our tax rate, the amount we pay per $100,000 of assessed value, is the lowest on the Cape by a wide margin. The estimated rate for fiscal year 2021 is $4.98, a 3% increase. Town debt and debt service, the cash that is required to cover the repayment of interest and principal on town debt, has been stable over the last 5 years. But the committee has concerns regarding projected town debt and debt service, as we'll see on a future slide. This slide shows the tax rates for all of the Cape towns. And as you can see, Chatham's 2020 rate of $4.82 is the lowest of the 15 Cape towns by a wide margin. The next lowest is the town of Dennis, 27% higher. This slide shows the change in tax rates over the last 5 years. In Chatham's tax rate, which again is the amount we pay for $100,000 of assessed value, is lower today than it was 5 years ago. This chart shows the average single-family home assessed value of property on most of the Cape towns. And at over $1 million, the average assessed value of a single-family home in Chatham is significantly higher than the Cape average. The next slide shows the average tax bill for most of the Cape towns. And with high values and low rates at an average tax bill of $4,842, Chatham comes in around the Cape average. The next slide shows the increase in the average tax bill for most of the Cape towns over the last 5 years. And the tax bill for Chatham's average single-family home increased by 15% over the last 5 years, less than most Cape towns. The increase was mostly due to an increase in property values over the last 5 years. Chatham has a AAA Standard & Poor's rating, and Chatham also has the most advanced infrastructure system on the Cape, particularly its wastewater treatment system. However, SRAC is concerned with the amount of town debt and the projected addition of future debt to fund future projects. Future projects and the debt funding of these projects should not automatically be considered just because debt drops off, i.e. matures or is retired. In addition, if interest rates increase significantly from today's historically low levels, debt servicing needs will also increase significantly. The great unknown is the increase to debt service that will arise from the millions of dollars of proposed and requested capital projects and the cost increases on ongoing projects. The next slide shows a significant liability of the town regarding its Opeb liability, which are costs for retiree benefits other than pensions. So even though the Opeb liability has increased $2.5 million over the last 2 years, good progress is being made on this front. The town hopes to eliminate the Opeb liability over about a 15-year period of time, assuming the same pace of contributions or a similar pace of contributions can be made. At town meeting last year, voters approved a contribution to the Opeb trust in the amount of $300,000. In addition, the land bank surcharge was repurposed to the tune of about $500,000 that will be added to the Opeb trust. So over time, these additional deposits will work to eliminate the Opeb liability. To wrap things up, non-residents and residents have a lot of reasons to be pleased with the financial condition of the town. The committee believes that Chatham will be able to fund existing and future debt obligations without significant tax increases. The town has been generous in affording summer residents an opportunity to contribute our views, and we are confident that Chatham continues to be in good hands. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Phil Richardson. I'm the chairman of the Housing Committee, Housing Subcommittee of the Summer Residence Advisory Committee. And I've been on the Summer Residence Advisory Committee for over 10 years. We come from California. My wife and I have summered here for 14 years. And actually, I came here in the 40s and my wife came here in the 60s. So we have some history with Chatham. The SRAC tries to assist the city in their ongoing problems, and one that has surfaced recently is the cost or the difficulty in young people being able to live in Chatham. So the town of Chatham has come up with several groups that have addressed this problem. One is the 365 Task Force, the other was the Finance Committee of the Board of Selectmen, and the other was the Economic Development Committee of the Board of Selectmen. And they've all come up with very detailed reports on how to keep young families in Chatham. And one of the major issues that comes up is the fact that there's all the housing in Chatham, as we all know, as summer residents, is getting very expensive. So how do we go about creating some modestly priced housing for Chatham? And it's called by various names: attainable housing, entry-level housing, workforce housing. So I decided that perhaps our little group could propose a demonstration project where we would take an acre of land in Chatham and build 10 houses, 10 small houses on the acre, and make them reasonably priced. And I just decided 300,000 would be the number. So I've had an architect friend of mine from California design a project that fits these specifications, and we'd like to show it to you now. So this is the project that John Warden from Healdsburg, California, wine country, came up with to follow my ideas. So it's an acre, it's got 1,200 square foot houses, and it's cluster design. Cluster design means that the houses are in a cluster and the parking is separate, because if you have garages attached to houses, then you have driveways, and it turns you out with a lot of asphalt and not as much usable space. So here you do have to walk to your garage, but then we come up with large backyards, a common space, and 10 garages and 10 parking spaces for 20 houses. And on the left is an overview of the project. Next slide. This is one, he had 3 house designs. This is a typical Cape, and it's 1,200 square feet. Next slide. And this is the design. He's a very good architect. This is very good. And this is a 2-bedroom design. So we won't go through it because that'll take a lot of time. So next slide. And this is a hybrid design that's sort of a combination, something between a Cape and a salt box design. And this is a 3-bedroom design. Next slide. Again, I won't go into the detail, but he does a very good job. And the living room, dining room, kitchen area is always very generous, and the bedrooms, it's well done. Next slide. And this is his salt box design, and it's a salt box design, good old Cape salt box. Next slide. And this is 4-bedroom. The last one was 3-bedroom. This is 4-bedroom. So to get 4 bedrooms in a 1,200 square foot house, this is actually a little bigger, 1,300 square, is quite a job, but I think he did a nice job. And of course, this could be converted back to a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom if it was desired. Next slide. At the top here, we see what the project would look like driving by on the local street. And then the lower slide is a picture is what it would be to walk around inside the common area space. And it makes a cute, it makes a nice little community. Next slide. And this is what it looks like, an overview in case you're flying over with your plane. But again, those are the several of the house designs are in that aerial shot. Next slide. And this is the total project, again, looking from a different direction. The street would be on the left, and I think it works very well. And so that's what we would like to propose to build in Chatham, on an acre somewhere in a busy part of town. To accomplish this project is not difficult, but it's somewhat complicated. So I'd like to go through the parts that would be required. If we have plans like we have, obviously more details, then the next thing we would have to do would be find a site. And everybody in town, I think, has interest in finding sites. And so there's plenty of sites in town. I like West Chatham because there is some public-owned property there, and you can walk to services, et cetera. So I think this project should be near one of the town centers, so it has the ability to be walkable. Then after that, we need the funding, and chatting about, I've talked to people, and it looks like Cape Cod 5's savings would be quite interested in this type of a project. Then we need a builder, and Chatham has a sufficient number of good builders, so we would need to have a good builder get involved in this project. Then the crucial thing is the zoning, because Chatham does not have any 10 units an acre zoning that I'm familiar with. And so the zoning, I also found out that zoning is only allowed to be changed at town meetings. So we would have to wait till May to really produce this project or to get it going. But I would hope that the committee could agree that rezoning 1 acre in town to 10 units for that acre would be something that could be accomplished. Then we need some other help. I have it on my list of must-haves. One would be that we would hope this town would donate an acre of land, that they would probably forgive the building fees, and which can be high some towns, and then perhaps give some assistance in providing offsites in case we find a site that requires running the sewer and water a long way. We would hope that the town would help participate in that, or perhaps we wouldn't pick that site. And then lastly, this whole program needs somebody to direct it, and I think it's something that a private party in town would love. I'd love we could find somebody in town that would love to to run this little program. So, you know, a little group with a dynamic leader, a retired person perhaps, with, of course, the town overseeing it. But I think that the town, Jill and the Board of Selectmen are quite busy with running towns without having to do a real estate project on the side. So that's the only thing I have left to say is that a lot of times these projects are proposed and people in the town say that this will ruin the small town character of this town or that town. I'm involved in one in California where I hear that. But a project like this really improves, far as I'm concerned, the small town character, because it creates a little community of its own, and the houses are small. In fact, I went by the Mayo House yesterday in downtown, and that is about the same size as these houses. So people lived in Chatham up to the 1900s in houses of 1,200 square feet quite comfortably. And so I hope that we could produce similar houses from the 150 year ago homes, and have everybody think this was a plus for the young families of Chatham. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Ted Kean, Chatham Coastal Resource Director, back again with my annual update, although admittedly a little different this year, being pre-recorded. Hopefully I'll be able to provide a lot of information, as in past years, on some of the different topics and issues. Specifically this year, we've been asked to focus on issues related to coastal resiliency and dredging throughout the town. We had a fairly challenging season, particularly this last winter, and obviously I'll be getting into that as well. We're going to start on the north side of Chatham, the east, with the North Inlet. Still the most dominant inlet for the Pleasant Bay and Chatham Harbor area, as it has been for the last number of years. I think anyone who's navigated in that area has noticed the very strong currents at the vicinity of Minister's Point, both incoming and outgoing. If you notice the large shoal that's just to the south of the inlet, you can get the impression that those currents are really just kind of peeling back that sand as the water comes in and tries to make that quick 90-degree turn on the way up into Pleasant Bay, as well as the outgoing currents coming out of Pleasant Bay and then trying to make it out the North Inlet. From the navigation perspective, it was challenging for much of the winter and spring, but we do now seem to have a fairly good navigation channel coming from the north out the North Inlet. So for most vessels, you have more or less pretty much all tide access, although it is challenging with any kind of a sea state near the low end of the tide. However, again, as it has been for the last couple of years, vessels coming out of Chatham Harbor, and more specifically our fishing fleet, are still quite challenged getting over the large shoals at the north end of Chatham Harbor if they try to get into the North Inlet. Fortunately, they have been able to get out to South Inlet, which is a good thing for this year. As far as erosion and resiliency in this area, somewhat surprisingly, Scattery Beach, which we had nourished a couple years ago, has held up quite well. It seems to be in a shadow of the currents coming in and out of the Pleasant Bay and around Minister's Point. So the sand along Scattery has lasted surprisingly well. Not is the case on the south side. The beach fronting Lynnell Lane has had a very significant change over the last couple of years, as the increase in exposure with the North Inlet as it's migrating slightly to the south has really impacted the south side, causing a much higher sediment migration and movement of this neck of the woods. Focusing in on Lynnell Lane Beach, a little closer inspection, you can see approximately 3 years ago, not quite 3 years ago, the beach was attached to the revetted point portion, southern portion of Minister's Point, with the marsh behind it, and then the salt pond just to the north. And here we are, more or less, current conditions, where the increased wave exposure has really pushed back the sand, overtopped the beach, and migrated the beach really onto the marsh system behind it. The salt pond to the north now has created a new opening, if you will, right around at the revetment. And there's a very sizable amount of sand that is now migrating, to the south along North Chatham. That in and of itself is actually a positive, if you will, for the homes further to the south, that section of shoreline. Here we are just over 2 years ago, looking north from the cow yard, Minister's Point located out here. And here we are in current conditions. You can see a very sizable migration of sand, both coming from the Lynnell Lane area as well as new material being input to the system due to the new wave exposure and currents from the North Inlet. Specifically related to coastal resiliency, I briefed the Summer Residence Committee last year. We had a coastal zone management grant looking at our entire north or east side of Chatham from approximately the head of Pleasant Bay or the southern end of Pleasant Bay through Chatham Harbor and down toward Morris Island. One of the recommendations of that study was to look at considering some sort of resiliency building in the area of Turn Island and the flats to the north of Turn Island. So we had another coastal zone management resiliency study ongoing this past year. We just received the draft report, which is currently under review. And again, it is looking at various options of what might be able to be done using sand, presumably done or derived from dredging somewhere in the Chatham Harbor area as the shoals develop, and placing that material either at the tip of the north end of Turn Island and or onto the flats themselves, hopefully providing some level of sheltering to the mainland behind it. Moving down to the South Inlet, we continue to have, as I'm sure folks looking at the overlook and see themselves, the southern tip of North Beach Island continues to migrate to the south, starting to provide some sheltering, which is a good thing, of the Little Beach area. It still has a bit more to go, but it has now migrated so that there is apparently some less wave action, getting toward Little Beach. From a navigation perspective, a channel much improved over last year for the fishing fleet and other vessels now heading down through the South Inlet. And how long that will last, we're not sure, but right now that seems to be the preferred inlet from a navigation perspective, at least for the deeper draft vessels. The other very significant effort undertaken by Outermost Harbor Marine over the past year was working on maintaining and developing a better channel to access their marina. This inset picture here really shows conditions last year, essentially, cutting off any access into and out of the marina. They spent a long time this past spring, as I say, with a private contractor to dredge this themselves a new channel. And as you see in this picture from April, the channel had been created, and somewhat surprisingly, it seems to be holding up so far. Indications are that, again, the southern extension of North Beach Island is sheltering it so that they aren't getting the same very substantial sediment migration into the channel as they did last year. It was not an easy project. It was a difficult season, weather-wise. The contractor they used, Dredge it, had a number of equipment issues as well as some weather delays. The beach that they nourished was the Quitnesset Spit. Approximately, I believe, I don't know the final volumes, but approximately 30,000 yards were placed from the dredge cut onto the spit, as well as down along south of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife area along the revetment portion. It has been very helpful for the Quitnesset area, which was getting overwashed very repeatedly and burying the salt marsh behind it. Now there's a sizable dune. But unfortunately also at the Fish and Wildlife Service, they have some large unstabilized, meaning no revetments or any other erosion protection. And these bluffs are directly facing the east, open exposure to the wave and climate of the Atlantic Ocean. So there's been some substantial erosion and bluff recession in this area, and they've actually had to relocate some of their walking paths along the upper portion of the Fish and Wildlife property. Moving around to Nantucket Sound, the Mill Creek Inlet, once again, as it has repeatedly over the last several years, had a sizable shoal migrate around the tip of the jetty on the west side and into the channel, pretty much closing off the interior system to navigation, although there isn't a lot of navigation in and out, but it also restricts tidal flow into this important marsh system in Flushing for Taylor's Pond. The county came in late in the season. They had some of their own COVID related delays. They were supposed to be working in the March timeframe. They frankly, weren't able to get in till, essentially May, end of April and May. So they did come in, they cleaned out the shoal, and they placed about 6,200 cubic yards along Cockle Cove, which was really in bad shape. We were kind of in a condition where if that project had not happened and the nourishment not occurred, we may have had to close Cockle Cove to the public this past summer. So we definitely bought ourselves at least 1 year, hopefully more, while we continue to look at options to do a much more extensive nourishment of the Cockle Cove area, ideally to the west, where we have placed material before, so that that material will naturally migrate to the east and maintain the beaches, both at Cockle Cove and Ridgeville. And then what really was a very substantial effort and focus of all our attention, and that's the Stage Harbor system. This actually is a picture I showed last year to your group, where I explained that now that the Fool's Cut and the South Beach that had been attached to Lighthouse Beach had broke through, virtually, not all, but a very high percentage of the water coming in from the South Inlet no longer goes to the north as it used to prior to the Fool's Break. And now that flow is coming into Nantucket Sound, because Nantucket Sound elevation-wise, the tide heights are generally, not entirely, but usually throughout the tide cycles are lower than the ocean. So the flow is from the east through the inlet, around Morris Island, and then into the Nantucket Sound system and the Morris Island cut. With that tidal flow comes a lot of energy to move sand. So we have seen a very large increase in the amount of sediment that is migrating from the east to the west and threatening, as I indicated last year, the entrance and access to Stage Harbor. So here we are in June of 19, and here we are at the beginning of the new calendar year. We were watching this all fall, getting extremely concerned about the extent of the shoaling. As you see in this picture, essentially, and the next slide shows, the red and green buoys. The channel is supposed to be between those buoys, obviously, and it essentially was closed off and non-existent. As we were watching this, we were very concerned about, navigation into Stage Harbor and the impacts that that would have. We contacted the Corps of Engineers, who had indicated to us that there was no money in their normal dredging budget to do any work for this year. Fortunately, the Corps of Engineers, even though they did not have any money in their normal dredging budget, they were able to find some emergency authorization given the dire situation. And the hopper dredge, the normal dredge that comes, the Currituck, to do Stage Harbor, was able to arrive in January. They initially had intended to, they couldn't work through the channel because it was just too shallow for the vessel to operate. So they had planned to work on this tip and try to cut back the tip. Unfortunately, the buoy tackle, the Coast Guard buoy, the green can in particular, was so sanded in that even with repeated efforts of the Coast Guard, even the vessel itself tried to pull that buoy out of the way, it was not able to. And they could not work that tip without getting that tackle, into the ship's mechanisms. So the only thing that they were able to do, and it was still very helpful, was to work around the edge of the shoal and improve conditions. So it did buy us some time, although we were also well aware that by the summer boating season, it was likely that it was not going to be good for navigation. The Currituck, just as a reminder, is an ocean-going hopper dredge. It works these types of systems up and down the East Coast. It's actually like an ocean-going dump truck that sucks the sand and water into the hold in the middle of the vessel, and then it steams to its designated offshore disposal site, where the hull actually splits apart, the sand dumps out, and then they go back and do it again. When they were here in January, they worked for approximately 20 days. They are working, or were working, with 2 shifts, essentially 24 hours. They did encounter a number of weather delays, and just the nature of the work made it less efficient than they normally have. They still nonetheless removed about 3,500 yards. Funding for the work was federally funded for the dredge operations itself, although the town did have to pony up some monies to help support the dredge, new mooring tackle to berth the vessel in Stage Harbor for that time of year, as well as shuttling the crew and some other efforts. So there was some town cost as well. As I indicated, even with this work, we were concerned that the channel wasn't going to stay in place come the summer boating season. So we, at the beginning of the calendar year, started looking at options to actually hire a private contractor. The county had indicated that they initially were going to try to do it, but then their schedule just got so booked that they were not going to be an option. So fortunately, we were able to contract. We put out a bid, and not surprisingly, the dredge that was working for Outermost Harbor became available when we were looking for the work, and not surprisingly, they were the lowest bid since they were already in town. And they were awarded a contract to dredge approximately 15,000 yards, although we were looking to dredge more. That was really just to get, a contract started. So they moved over here to Stage Harbor in the middle part of March. The project was challenging, given our, historical piping plover and endangered shorebird nesting at the eastern end of Hardings Beach. We had to maintain the dredge pipe offshore. Normally, they would like to run it along the beach. We pumped the material down to the 2 public beaches at Hardings Beach, which would require what's referred to as the booster pump, since the dredge by itself is not powerful enough to dredge the sand or to pump the sand all the way down to the final placement in Hardings Beach. So the booster pump, in the dunes worked well. It was able to, push the material to the direction we needed. The dredge initially, at the beginning of the job, tried to work from the outside in, but there was just too much weather and sea conditions, so they decided to move around, and they pumped or dredged from the inside out. Our real goal all along was to reestablish a channel in its more or less original configuration. We were just concerned that if we tried to work on the exterior sides, that this large shoaling area would just reestablish itself. So they had a very challenging year. They had, as I indicated, some weather delays, and they had some very troubling equipment issues. There were a number of downtime periods when either the dredge equipment, failed and they had to go do some replacement parts hunting, as well as, again, just days where they couldn't work with the weather. So it was not an easy project. They had hoped to be done by the end of April. They really got pushed into completing a job by the end of May. The nourishment areas, as I indicated, at Hardings Beach, our targets were the 2 public beaches, public parking lot areas. In addition, just to the west of the first parking lot, the Harding Shores Association, their beaches were very eroded, and they were very anxious to also get sand. Since it's a private beach, they were willing to fund that effort, so we did place material along their section as well at their expense. It actually benefits the town because the material along this area typically migrates from west to east, so their sand will, thank you very much, benefit the public lots or beaches in time. Just to kind of give a representation, if you didn't notice conditions at Hardings Beach, they were getting pretty bad. High tide line had really made its way up to the dune line all along this section, and the western tip of the second parking lot actually was starting to get undermined. When we had some weather and high water, we were really going to have to focus on protecting in some fashion that corner. The project was a success in building out these 2 beaches. We always wish we had more material, but with the material we got, we were able to make a substantial improvement to both public recreational beaches. And we were also able to do the goal that we wanted. We were able to dredge through, reestablish the channel in its normal configuration. So we really achieved that goal. Sort of some of the statistics. We are still in the works or midst of finalizing the volumes based on surveys of before and after conditions. We estimate it's going to be real close to the 25 to 27,000 cubic yards total. Not surprisingly, when you go out to contract for private dredging, it's a much more expensive proposition than what we have typically faced with the county dredge. Again, because we don't have a final volume, we don't know the final cost estimate, but it's going to be on the order of $650,000. Just for reference, when we got the original bids for this project, based on the $15,000 estimate, this contractor won the bid at just over $500,000. The 2 other bidders were well over 1.2, 1.3 million. So you can just get a sense of the different scale of working with private dredging firms as opposed to the county. We were fortunate last year to still have access to this state dredging grant, which we'd received, frankly, the prior year for $350,000 that we weren't able to utilize. So that was now used for this past year. And as I indicated, Harding Shores provided some funding themselves for their portion of the beach on in the order of $68,000. However, even with this work, we were still quite concerned that once this job was done, that we may not get the whole season out of it. A number of years ago, approximately 10 years or so, when we had a similar potential issue with access to Stage Harbor, the Corps and the town developed a memorandum of understanding, or agreement rather, MOA, that allowed the town to actually shift money from the town to the Corps when they didn't have funding for a project, and actually, in essence, hire the Corps' dredge to come and do work. So that's what we did. Again, in the spring, we worked on executing an MOA with the Corps. They had, fortunately, about a 14-day window where they felt they could come to Chatham if an MOA was executed and if the town provided the funding. So we discussed it internally. We felt it was very important to bring the Corps back and, really clean out as much as we can at the town expense, because again, from a cost efficiency, even though the 10 days at $36,000 a day is not inexpensive, you can see the volume in those 10 days, they were able to move approximately 58,000 cubic yards of material. So a much more efficient manner in which to do the dredging, reestablish better conditions. But again, the issue is that that sand is placed in the offshore, and it really doesn't, do a substantial benefit to the town's beaches, similar to a hydraulic pipeline. So there is a downside, obviously, of using the hopper dredge. I can't stress the concern that we are having about this location and the future, as conditions are still developing with the outer beaches, the very deteriorated South Beach, the flow from the old South Inlet coming around, and what it really means for the future. It's not going to go away, that's for sure. The dredging we performed, the substantial dredging we performed this past year is probably going to need to be repeated. Recognizing that this issue isn't going away in the near term until we may see a whole-scale change on the outer beach system, we have submitted, or rather we are, I'm repeating myself here are the issues that we're really focusing on, obviously the severe shoaling, but another issue that we've been watching, and that's the erosion right at this corner of what we refer to as Crescent Beach. With the higher currents, which gets very close to shore, we've seen a fairly rapid increase in erosion right at this point. Will it continue? We're not sure, but it's enough to catch our attention. 40 feet estimated loss in the past 3 years alone. So based on these issues, we've submitted another coastal resiliency grant, this time kind of shifting from the east side to the west side, or excuse me, the south side. And what we're looking at is trying to develop a report and study that would evaluate various options that we might have to employ to address both these issues, both the shoaling and the erosion. Whether or not it's relocating the channel, simply beach nourishment areas, creating sand dikes, or actually putting in some sort of, under the water deflection devices that would try to channel the flow away from these areas where it's causing significant impacts. That grant is under review. We should hear, sometime in August whether the grant has been approved. But in lieu of those alternatives, really, we're just going to be facing a severe dredging need in all likelihood in the foreseeable future. We were also fortunate, again, given these issues, we submitted and were approved for another dredging grant from the state, similar to the past one we just utilized. This does require a 50-50 match. We bumped the numbers up, hopefully, within the realm of our ability to handle. Exactly how we plan to develop a dredging program with the monies in hand, we're not sure yet, but at least we do have, a fair amount of money to put into this effort, assuming we need to, and we are assuming we will be needing to. And then just a very quick update. There are two efforts that are still ongoing. As I think everyone can appreciate, the COVID pandemic has impacted all types of issues or activities. Our construction projects were impacted, as well as the studies and reports by the various contractors. They got impacted by the pandemic as well. One of the studies that we had hoped would be nearing completion, and it's underway. It just we're probably at least a month out from the original estimate, and that's the town-owned dredge evaluation, focusing on whether the town should actually purchase its own dredge and run its own dredge program, and staff it, maintain it, purchase the equipment. It's a very complicated effort if we want to actually get into that type of a program. But given the needs that we have throughout the town, at least we can have, I think, a very good evaluation whether this is something that really, is to the advantage of the community. The other study that initiated this past year at the request of the selectmen, since we do have these erosion issues along our south side and the need for continued nourishment, the selectmen were interested in looking at ways that would slow down the loss of that sand and how we might be able to prolong the sand in place, ideally reduce our nourishment needs, although it's, I think, fully recognized that, if we're going to maintain our beach or need to maintain our beaches, we're going to need to have sand placed. But let's look at some options to reduce the loss of that sand and hopefully become cost effective. And with that, I thank you. I hope that was helpful. Sorry I can't take your questions right now. But hopefully next year we'll see you again and update it once more. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, members of the Summer Residence Advisory Committee and members watching from home on Channel 18. My name is Dr. Robert Duncanson, Director of Health and Natural Resources for the town of Chatham. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes and give you a quick update on where the town is with regard to our response to COVID-19. As I'm sure everybody's aware, starting earlier this year, the coronavirus started to surge around the world, and it leads to a medical condition called COVID-19. It arrived in the U.S. in, February, March timeframe, and then from there has just continued to expand throughout the United States as well as other places around the world. So back on March 16th, the town manager and the Board of Selectmen declared an emergency for the town of Chatham. The Emergency Operations Center was activated so that we could coordinate all the various town departments and how they respond to COVID-19, as well as disseminating information out to the public in a timely manner. Beginning on March 17th, we closed town offices to the public because it was clear that face-to-face contact or handshakes or those kinds of things were clearly the way that COVID-19 was being spread throughout the world. And so anything that could be done to limit those kind of interactions were appropriate to control the spread of COVID-19. So while we did close town offices to the public, town operations for the most part did not stop. All the various departments were still being manned, either in person at their respective offices or remotely from home. A lot of business was shifted over to email, and we started doing meetings and all using Channel 18 and virtual platforms, things like Zoom and Teams, to be able to continue to have town business operate. And I think it's safe to say that that has worked out very well. For the most part, all town operations have continued, and we've received very positive feedback from the public about the town staff's ability to keep operations going, even in the face of this global pandemic. Some departments like DPW, Harbor Master, Shellfish, that primarily work out in the field just continued operations as normal, but practicing appropriate social distancing, wearing masks when required, and people staying home when they were sick. But through all this, we've managed to keep pretty much all town operations functioning and meeting the needs of the public and people that were, had permits in place or were looking to permit new construction or renovations or whatever, pretty much continued along per normal. Now, the governor, as I mentioned, took a lot of actions with regard to the Commonwealth as a whole, including pretty well shutting down all businesses in the Commonwealth for a period of time, while a Commonwealth plan was developed that would reopen businesses and do things in an appropriate manner to try to keep the curve low and to slow down the exponential growth that we were seeing in other parts of the state. Because as I mentioned, Cape Cod did a very good job at flattening the curve, but other parts of the state unfortunately did not fare as well. So the governor took the steps of pretty much closing down all businesses, closing down events, limiting gatherings to certain numbers of people, all in an attempt to bring this under control, primarily to save a negative impact on the healthcare system. Because early on, there was a very great concern that the healthcare system would be overwhelmed with, people that needed hospitalization and needed ventilators. We did set up in Massachusetts a couple of remote sites with the help of the federal government, the Army Corps of Engineers, and others to provide additional hospital capacity if it was needed. And I'm happy to report that while all those efforts were taking place, in the end, while some of those satellite facilities were needed, including ones that were set up here in Cape Cod, they were not needed to the extent that we all feared they might be when this thing was first taking off. And that was really a testament to the folks in Massachusetts and elsewhere that really took the steps seriously: social distancing, stay-at-home orders and advisories, and wearing masks when out in public. So as the spring went on and we started to get information, and things were starting to become under control in Massachusetts, the governor did come out with a 4-phase plan to start to reopen the economy and kind of get things back to normal. And so that plan was implemented starting in late May and early June. Now, as of July 29th, we are currently in phase 3, step 1 of what will be a 4-phase plan ultimately. I can tell you that phase 4 of the plan will not kick in until we have a vaccine or an adequate direct medical treatment for the COVID-19 disease. So phase 4, we won't see that probably for quite some time. But we are in phase 3. Pretty much everything in the Commonwealth has reopened, with the exception of large events and bars and some other venues where social distancing and all just frankly is not possible. In Chatham specifically, back on May 21st, our Board of Health put an order in place requiring the wearing of face masks on Main Street between the Rotary and School Street from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And that was a recognition of, as the summer season started to hit and businesses reopened, Main Street, as many of you are aware of, is just so small, so narrow sidewalks, and a lot of visitors and all, and summer residents and residents in the summertime, that things like social distancing would just not be possible. So as a result, the Board of Health did put in that requirement requiring face masks from 9 a.m. To 9 p.m. Sorry about that. The phone just keeps ringing. On June 4th, the Board of Health expanded their mandatory face mask requirement to include the Lighthouse Beach overlook and stairs, the Fish Pier observation deck when it was reopened beginning in July, as well as the transfer station. Recognizing again that these were all areas where there would be large congregations of people, and just given the nature of the area, social distancing may not be possible. Because the governor's order that was issued on May 6th required, the wearing of face masks whenever social distancing could not be achieved. And by social distancing, we mean whenever you were not able to maintain at least 6 feet between you and other folks. So, in those areas on Main Street, the Lighthouse Beach overlook, the Fish Pier observation deck, and the transfer station, the Board of Health recognized it would be very difficult to meet social distancing guidelines. On June 23rd, they added fines to those mandatory mask area orders, recognizing that, while we were doing a significant amount of public education through the website, electronic message boards, posters on telephone poles and whatnot, sometimes you need to become a little stronger to get people's attention. So the board did add a warning to folks for the first offense, second offense being $100, and third offense being $300 if you were caught in those areas not wearing a face mask during the mandatory times. We really were trying to take an educational approach and not get into a position where we were going to be issuing a lot of fines. So that's why the first infraction, if you will, spirited a warning as opposed to a fine. And the police department, they were provided with masks and warning notices. Their bicycle officer on Main Street was similarly provided with that information, as well as in July, working with Barnstable County, we were able to get a COVID inspector or a COVID educational person to be in town several days a week for a limited number of hours, who would also assist with the educational efforts regarding the mask wearing. One of the other significant things the town did early on in the process when we had to close down town facilities, including the Council on Aging and the Community Center, and you know, we were under stay-at-home order. We recognized that some folks in town would have difficulty complying while still maintaining things like food delivery or obtaining food as well as medication. So through the Emergency Operations Center, we instituted a program where folks could call in, and then working with our CERT volunteers, which is our community emergency response team, we were able to provide for grocery and medication deliveries. And that has been very well received, and we've continued that program since its inception back in March. And we've limited the number of days overall. Just as things started to reopen, we started to lose some of our volunteer manpower, but we've still been able to keep that open. And just recently, we've transitioned that over to the COA as they were able to get their buses back on the road after they'd been retrofitted with the appropriate barriers and whatnot to be able to keep those deliveries going. So if you're in town and you have a need for grocery delivery or pharmacy delivery, and for whatever reason you can't get out, you can contact the Emergency Operations Center or the Council on Aging, and we'll see if we can assist you in that process. One thing that I did want to touch on just very quickly, because I'm sure everybody has heard about it, it's been in the press. There was a private house party in Chatham back in July, and we've had a number of COVID-19 positive cases that have been linked to that event. We are aware of it, we are monitoring it, and we have worked with local agencies to hold a pop-up testing clinic in Chatham, where we ran 34 people through that clinic who either attended the party or were close contacts to those that attended the party. And we will continue to work with both state and regional agencies to address these kind of events, and hopefully the word is out to people that holding these kind of parties where social distancing and wearing a mask may not be followed are not the appropriate thing to do at this point. So we will keep people updated on that house party and the ramifications for the community as they become available. And just again, reiterating, we're somewhat tied in the amount of information we can give out on those kind of events. And I know that can be frustrating to people, but we will try to give you as much information about it as we can. And then just one other thing I wanted to touch base on, we are working on plans, as I indicated earlier. Town offices at this point at the end of July are still closed to the general public. We are working on plans to reopen those town offices once conditions are appropriate. And by that, I mean, we have made some physical alterations to some of the town offices already in terms of putting up plexiglass barriers and other things. We are still, at this point in time, waiting for other materials, desk shields, desk separators to come in. Once those are in, we will be looking to reopen town offices to the general public. We will have a soft opening where we will probably open town offices just by appointment only for a period of time. And then once we are confident that everything is in place to protect both town employees as well as members of the public that may be coming into the offices, we will open town offices back to normal business. But as I indicated earlier, right now in mid-July and for the last number of months since we closed town offices back in March, all town business is still being conducted. So if you have business to do with the town, please reach out by email, by phone, online, by mail. You can certainly mail things in, and we will address any issues that you have, help you with permits and whatnot, because all town functions are still being carried out. And then the two other things I just wanted to touch base on, effective August 1st, there is a new travel order for the Commonwealth. And I would urge anyone who may be thinking of traveling, or if you're planning to have relatives or friends come visit you, please go to the state's website. We have the link to it up on our town website on our COVID-19 page. I would urge you strongly to go check out the criteria under that travel order, because it has gotten more strict. We were under a travel advisory in previous weeks, but this new travel order does take place on August 1st. So I would urge you to make sure that you review that information. There are very limited criteria where you're exempt from that order, and the order does apply to Massachusetts residents that may travel out of state and then return. So if you're going back to your normal home and then you're planning to come back to Massachusetts, you would still need to quarantine, or you would need to quarantine for 14 days under that travel order, unless you can provide the appropriate documentation. So again, I just urge everyone to be aware of that. And again, if you have people that are planning to come and visit you, make sure they're aware of that as well. And then the final thing I just wanted to touch on is our town website. We do have a COVID-19 page there with a lot of information, which we keep updated on almost a daily basis. We have information on the number of cases in Chatham. We have information on the openings and closings of various places as those happen, both at the state level and the local level. And we have a lot of other good information on COVID-19, what's happening in Barnstable County, what's happening in the state, and what's happening in Chatham. So I urge you to go ahead and check that out on a frequent basis. And if you want to sign up for the automatic notifications, you can do that, so that when we post something on the website, we can send out an automatic notification, so you'll get an email indicating that new information has been posted. And so with that, I think that will end my update on COVID-19 and the town of Chatham. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our first Summer Resident Advisory Committee video presentation. We were fortunate this year to hold virtual meetings and to provide this video presentation through the time, effort, and knowledge of Craig Rowe, Chatham's Director of Informational Technologies, Mark Van Bork, Assistant Media Coordinator for Chatham Television Channel 18, and Ryan Darman, Media Coordinator. Craig provided training on the virtual platform, MS Teams, to each of our committee members and provided technology support during each of our meetings. Mark was our resident Apple expert who provided consultation to those of us with Apple computers, helping us to successfully use the Microsoft program, MS Teams. Craig, Mark, and Ryan spearheaded the effort to provide this video presentation. We would not have had a summer season this year if not for the efforts of this excellent informational technology staff. I would also like to thank Shauna Neely and Jill Goldsmith for their assistance in making it possible for our committee to meet virtually this summer. Finally, I would like to thank the Chirac committee members for their commitment this summer to continuing the mission of our committee, and in particular, to those who led the effort on this 2020 video presentation: Colette Trailer, Joe McDonald, Jamie Meehan, and Kay Flynn. Thank you.